The Dodge Challenger, the Nissan GTR, is turbocharged. Why did Dodge choose a supercharger for their flagship tarmac-slaying V8? But when Nissan wanted to dominate the racing world, and aspiration is just a fancy word for breathing. More power, you need more air. And to get more air, well, you just build a bigger displacement engine. Both a turbocharger and a supercharger are really, in fact, displacement modifiers. And if you add a displacement modifier like, say, a turbo or a supercharger, you're really adding forced induction, aka forcing more air into the engine without having to make the engine bigger. Basically because most engines are air limited, 14.7 parts air to 1 part of fuel. So every time you add 1 molecule of fuel, you also need to add about 15 molecules of air. Basically, a supercharger uses mechanical energy to compress the air. Usually, it's done with a belt that comes off the harmonic balancer or crank pulley, just like the alternator and other accessories. See, while a supercharger takes energy from the crankshaft of the engine to do its job, a turbocharger uses the velocity and heat energy from the exhaust that's already screaming down the exhaust pipe. Superchargers are pretty neat because they make boost instantly. It's run mechanically off the engine, so if the engine's running, it's running too. You want the instant response when you press on the skinny pedal. The downside is that you have to rob some engine power to end up in a scenario where your engine can't actually power the supercharger. And it's really insane, like the Roots blower bolted to the top of a top fuel car needs somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 horsepower just to run. And the 2.7 liter unit strapped to the Demon, well, it saps more power than an entire Miata just to get its blades turning. And once they are, it would starve the entire cabin of the car of air in just 800 feet on a drag strip. Yeah. News, that's where turbos come in. Now, don't get me wrong, turbos do have 1 or 2 major drawbacks. See, they take time to spool up and start compressing the air. And the bigger the turbo, the longer it takes. There are ways to offset it, sure. Like Toyota, for instance, is a huge fan of using a little turbo that basically powers a bigger turbo. Since they work by scavenging escaping exhaust, well, you're basically getting free energy. And a bunch of tubing, since the exhaust and the intake have to be connected to it, and they need oil pressure and return lines and a way to get rid of boost when they don't need it through diverter valve or blow-off valve, which are the things that make the cool turbo noises. A belt to it. So to sum it up, superchargers are easier to install, but can only make a limited amount of boost and rob power from the engine. Turbos, on the other hand, turn waste energy into power, but are definitely more complicated. A big engine that already makes a ton of power doesn't suffer as much from the power robbed by the supercharger, and benefits a lot more from the efficiency of a turbo. But if we had to choose one, which is better? Truth is, it's just way easier to make a ton of power with a turbo. You couldn't just bolt up a Hellcat supercharger to your Civic. There's literally no room. And your pitiful little B16 doesn't make enough power to turn the pulley. Sorry guys, from a practical standpoint, the turbo is a better way to make power. They're just more efficient. Honda, even frickin' Kia is strapping small turbos onto all their cars so that you can get some extra power without having to burn a ton of the extra fuel required for a... So, why do some companies like Dodge and Chevy still go with supercharger? Remember, a supercharger makes instant power. That means if you do go drag racing, you can launch off the line like no one's business. In the old days, you didn't even find turbos on big engines. With the larger displacement, it didn't much matter if you robbed some power to run the supercharger. The efficiency just didn't factor into it. But that's changing too. As technology offsets the limitations of the turbo, if you can build the revs and spool a turbo, you know, like you have launch control, then you're building boost right off the line too.